Welcome to All Things Chiropractic.
Welcome to another episode of All Things Chiropractic. I'm Paul Andrews.
I'm Dr. Mark Davini. Welcome.
And today's podcast, we're going to be talking about typecasting.
Ooh.
Subtitle, Employee of the Month.
Yes. Yeah. The whole alphabet soup of the different generations.
How do you communicate and understand the younger workforce? If there's one thing we get on our membership inquiries when it comes to HR, it's oftentimes about the struggle between the generational gap of the employer and the younger employee.
And it is a gap for sure, but it's a lot of times the struggle comes from the employer, obviously the one paying the employee, wanting them to be like them.
Boy, is that true, right? And so to sort of dissect this a little bit, we have to sort of break down the generations that are in the workforce right now, knowing that the older generations, I'll let Dr. Davini talk for them, would represent more of the employer versus the younger generations that are the employees.
Yes, and it's not always that way, but in chiropractic, it's commonly that way. Or at least the employer, the chiropractor, will be of a different generation than the employee, most likely.
For sure. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics has broken down the U.S. workforce in this way. The baby boomers represent 15% of the workforce, Gen X, 31%, millennials, 36%, and Gen Z, 18%. So, Doc, we just mentioned a few generations. We've heard of them, sure, the labels, but what is that? What does that really, what are the details or characteristics of these generations?
Well, let's start with the best one, the baby boomers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Generally, they say the baby boomers are born between, 1946 and 1964-ish. So those are the baby boomers.
You're on the early end of that, right?
What are you talking
like
about?
The real early.
You're a baby boomer. We're both boomers.
I'm not a boomer.
You're a boomer.
I'm telling you, I'm not.
No. No, but there is, so a baby boomer is, basically they characterize them as having a strong work ethic, focus on job stability. I want to be here and I want to be here forever. They look for careers, long-term types of careers, and generally have a sense of duty, and being one, I would say that would fit my general broad stroke opinion of myself.
So in person and loyal to somebody. I mean, that's sort of like some of the takeaways I got from baby boomers as a description versus myself, who's Generation X, by the way, right? Sort of in the middle of all that. And they're described as independent, resourceful, and self-reliant. They have experience with, technology as it's evolved over the years, but do remember a time before the digital age, right? And there's more of a work-life balance value there. And this says that they're skeptical of authority, more skeptical of authority than boomers. Would you say that?
I do, because it was your generation that sort of
ruined everything.
Ruined everything. Yeah. Your generation, during the late 60s and early 70s, created the revolution, the man, you created all
the man's still out there, by the way.
The man's still out there. Right? You created the man, and you created all, sex, drugs, and rock and roll mindset,
I would, yeah. I'm going to leave that one there floating. So I would say, based somewhat on our relationship as business partners and friends, but also just in general, that Gen X and baby boomers, they get along pretty well overall. Maybe not as they were sort of making their way as younger adults usually do. They want to be revolutionary in some ways. But nowadays, I think there's a lot more in common than not in common between baby boomers and Gen X.
I agree. I mean, there's actually a subcategory called Gen Jones, which actually spans 1955 to 1980, which would grab both of us.
Okay.
So if we were in this Gen Jones category, which they characterize by being keeping up with the Joneses, that's where it came from. But not that we were materialistic.
You were handing me a glass of Kool-Aid, so I thought it was Jonestown. Sorry.
No. Keep it up. Keep it up. What flavor Kool-Aid do you like?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But and even though that's not really necessarily how we would characterize ourselves strongly, but it's basically saying that there is this hybrid between baby boomers and Gen Xers. So yeah, I agree with you. It's why we're able to intercommunicate well.
So, but according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the combination of baby boomer and Gen X in the workforce is a minority compared to millennials and Gen Z.
Oh, and not only a minority, it's an aging out minority.
Yes, you are. Sorry. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, you look great for 90.
Thank you.
Oh, I mean 70-ish. Yeah. I tease because I love.
That's it.
So millennials, right? So because now we're getting into the generations that, to me, from what we've been hearing from our members and their inquiries and my own experience, there's much more of a gap between Gen X and millennials than I think baby boomers and Gen X,
I think a nice way to look at it is if you think about technology and how it changed exponentially over the years. So it wasn't this linear growth of technology. I mean, truly, I say that as a reference point. My sophomore year in undergrad was the first year they let us use a calculator. And now we have the internet, right? So, but that wasn't a linear
How
growth.
big was your calculator back then?
Oh, it was the same size. It was only about an inch thick. It was the Beaumont.
Was it battery or solar?
It was rechargeable battery.
Oh.
Yeah, but it was LED.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Right.
Not liquid crystal, but LED.
Right.
But my point is that tech has taken the gap between the Generation X and the Generation Y, which are the millennials. That's what we're talking about. Generation Ys, which are 1981 to 1996. It put them into a category where they were able to do things technologically that we didn't even dream of most of the time.
And when we look at that and say to ourselves, a lot of the employers are baby boomers, right? Because they've been around longer.
Or
they've
Gen
got the
Xs.
businesses.
Yeah, or
Some
Gen Xs.
certainly Gen Xs too.
Yeah.
That the ability for these generations to understand each other, especially baby boomers with the millennials, Gen Ys, and somewhat the Gen Xs, especially if you're early on in the Gen X, category. We see a lot of frustration, right? Because there's as you said earlier on, you want them to be like you, like to value work and hard work, pay your dues. I feel like when we get into generation beyond millennials to Gen Z, the pay your dues attitude isn't really there.
Right.
Like, tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like, that younger generation, they want more of that. I wouldn't even say work-life balance. They want more of that life-work balance. Like,
exactly.
That experience of life comes first.
And I used to always say that, like if we even go before baby boomers, where we had the silent generation, which is 28 to 45, and then of course the greatest generation, right? 1901 to 27. But if you look at those generations and you go through history, there's one outstanding fact that jumped out to me, that when you talk about the greatest generation, the silent generation, then the baby boomers, and even into some of the Gen Xers, mostly just up to the baby boomers, because of history, there were times in their life where their existence was threatened. Literally, if we didn't win this war, we'd be speaking German right now. Or literally, we were fighting for our lives as a society. We were fighting for our way of life as a society. And as we start getting away from that threat more and more and more, we start we stop thinking about things like sense of duty, which is part of the boomer characteristics, and we stop thinking about our levels of responsibility to society in general, and we start looking at the mirror of our life, of our life's characteristics, and looking at that mirror and saying, what does it mean to me and mine? And what does it mean to my world? And where am I? What do I need to know? And not that millennials don't have a broad sense of duty. In a sense, they do. They're very, very mindful of the value driven. Actually,
right. But if we hone in concurrent to what you just said about the risk to life and limb, right, is also the information age. The accessibility of information in the greatest generation, silent generation, even baby boomers, your information was given to you for the most part, right?
Newspapers or radio, if you were lucky enough to have a radio or TV,
right?
You know?
Right. And so the how well we're connected from an information standpoint and how that grew, I think also plays a lot of influence on the generational differences.
Oh, absolutely. In some respects, one might say, and I will say it and believe this, that we have too much information. It is information overload. Do I really need to know about, what's going on in a state 5 states away from me in a small town in a galaxy far, far away? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me that I'm worrying about something happening in a place that doesn't enter my world, but yet we know everything about everybody. And that's the social media internet dilemma that we have.
I know. Many people have talked about this. Many people have said the more we're connected, the more we're disconnected in a sense, right? And we've even had podcasts where we talked about, in-person versus online continuing education and what the cascading effects of that are, positive and negative.
And we try and find some meaning in our life by enhancing, I'm going to say enhancing what should be minor things. The smallest disagreement becomes a major issue in my life, and it's going to drive me forward. And we're talking about, like I say, when you think about the older generation, that we really did have our lives threatened. Our existence threatened. There's very little that goes on in the course of a day that threatens your existence. In spite of what people might think, nobody's marching down the street with an army in goose step ready to take you over. Nobody's doing a blitzkrieg and conquering your country in 11 days and killing anybody.
Hey, listen, we have a lot of listeners in Germany, so tread lightly.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, but I'm saying they know the danger of all that themselves, in their world. And I agree that it's just an example of saying, look, history always repeats itself, and we hope that never does. But for the most part, it's a different mindset when your existence is threatened, as opposed to your livelihood or your societal existence is threatened.
Well, and the trouble is, because information can be obtained from so many sources, both good and bad, that sensationalized news becomes what gets attracted the most. It gets the most attention, whether it's true or not. I mean, I'll see something on social media, I'll be scrolling along, and I'll be like, my first response is, wow, that's unbelievable. Then I go, wait a minute, is that actually true? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure anymore. And again, do I need to know that? I reached a point where I was like, do I really need to know that? Because in life, you have your own things that you're concerned with, and I don't need someone else's problems on top of my own, unless it threatens my existence. Then their problem becomes my problem or whatever. But it would take on so much on a day-to-day basis. And it was interesting driving here. I was listening to the radio. That's that device in your car that brings talk in from other sources.
Satellite radio?
Yeah. And they were running a contest, and so they were giving away tickets. And the person who called in to claim her tickets was notified through social media. Someone in her Facebook page told her, get on the radio and call him. You won. She wasn't listening to the radio.
Right.
She was on Facebook
Yeah.
and found out that she won a contest she entered on the radio.
Well, she must have listened to it at some point.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
to enter it.
yeah,
But yeah.
absolutely. But I'm saying it's another way that people are connecting. Well, this radio only has, a certain range of broadcast, and Facebook is like forever. The person who told her to call the radio station and claim her tickets came from somebody that was like in a far, far away place.
Yeah.
And she didn't know her.
So let's loop it back now that we've talked about it, because I think part of it is for employers to manage expectations. Because if you expect a millennial to not look at their phone during their work shift, I don't think that that's going to happen very much, right?
You'll also have to have counseling.
Yes, right. So it's more about having the communication and limiting that behavior, managing that behavior that you yourself would say, I would never have done that. But we didn't even have cell phones when we were that young.
Well, I mean, it's going very quickly. You're going to have to deal with the Gen Zers, which, were born between 97 and 2012. So you might even be hiring Gen Zers. And they're the ones that really want that flexible schedule, that they don't have to be live for everything. And we've talked about this in other podcasts, that, they have a priority. They prioritize their life balance and they want more time off. I remember one doc telling me they were interviewing an associate, and the associate was saying, well, this job sounds good, but I never want to work past 6 and I don't want to work Fridays.
Join the club.
Yeah. And the doc looked at him and said, me either. That's why I'm hiring you.
Right.
And
Right.
and it was to that person who was the potential employee associate. It's like, no, we're going to set the rules up front right away. I'm going to keep my life balance now. I'm not going to put the time in like the boomers might have thought. I got to work hard for the first 5-10 years, and then my life starts getting easier. We'll say the millennials or the Gen Y and the Gen X people, they want it from the beginning. And you want to know something? Maybe they're right.
In
Some ways.
Some ways.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's a hard pill to swallow, because I think about it this way. The older generation, they had one job. They worked at it for 30 plus years and they had their pension and they retired and then they died. And then even in my generation, maybe you'd have 2 jobs, maybe 3.
Right.
In today's generation, it's hard for someone in my generation or older to not feel used, because that younger generation is coming in, getting the experience and walking, because they got a couple, an extra 50 cents an hour, or they're just, I'll just find something else.
Oh, and I forgot the term, but there is actually a term for it that is encouraged in the younger generations to career hop, so that your resume. In the old days, we used to think showing a whole bunch of different jobs that you didn't work at for more than 6 months or a year didn't look good. Today, it's what they try and do, because they're trying to demonstrate that they have a diversity of knowledge, because they've done these 6 jobs in the last 2 years.
Well, and statistically, they make more money because there's demand for those people, so they'll make.
Right.
In the short term, I think that some of the problem comes with when you job hop and you're not looking at the long term. You don't have a retirement plan. You don't have an investment plan. You're going to job hop and then realize when you're in your 50s, I really don't have, like, what am I going to do when I retire? Because Social Security certainly won't be enough.
It's interesting, and I've thought about this, and I said, for the most part, all that we just discussed almost is self-limiting, because they all grow up most of the time, and they all
ask some of these parents out there. That's true.
But I mean, they all end up getting married most of the time, or having a family most of the time. And the truth of the matter is, there are certain realities in life that come slamming toward you and make you realize that I just I have 2 kids. There's no quitting at 6 and not working on Fridays.
That may be true, but some of the statistics show that the younger generations aren't getting married as often,
right?
And if they're having kids at all, they're having them much later in life too.
Yeah.
To me, that goes to that centric life first, work second, quote unquote balance. Which balance doesn't mean 50-50. Balance is really just the perspective of that person and what what they're looking for.
Exactly. And time does change a lot, and maybe with others it doesn't. There's a certain entitlement mindset that is out there, that there's a certain amount of whatever that's owed to them. And, our generations grew up recognizing nothing is owed to us. We only achieve what we achieve through our own goals and our own work ethic and desires. And the only entitlement we have is sooner or later we're going to die. And that's kind of it. And the older the generation, the more of that there is. The younger the generation, the less of that there is.
Well, and my opinion is that there was way less of a security net or blanket if you failed in life, meaning you left the house, you're on your own. Moving back in with your parents was like never an option. The parents didn't want you back. They already turned your room into a gym or something,
Sewing room.
Yeah, right. Like whatever it is.
Yeah.
And now certainly the younger generations aren't even going out on their own. Part of that perhaps is this balance. Part of it is just everything's so much more expensive. Going on your own is really more of a challenge financially now, so
it's what you consider an adult. And the older the generation, you are an adult a lot younger than you are, you think are considered as an adult now. My parents married at 19. That was common. I mean, it's one of those things where as time goes on now, you could be 30 and not married, and that would be common. So the generation changes a lot, and everything about those generations change with it. So what is an adult? The law says that you can be on your parents' health insurance till you're 26. Well, what's that saying?
as long as you're in school, right?
As long as you're in school or whatever. But I'm just saying, what's that saying? When are you not considered an independent entity until you're beyond 26? It's just posing a thought. Like, where is the adult mindset for each generation?
What metric are you looking for? Because at 18 you gotta file for as a guy, right? Don't you still have to do that? Whatever civil not.
Oh yeah, you have to register
select for the
service, and Well, I mean, I can think of, say, for example, my wife. Her father told there were three girls in the family, and they were all growing up, and basically the rule was when you're 18, you're out.
That doesn't normally happen today.
That would probably never happen today, because they were taught to be self-sufficient. They couldn't get a driver's license until they learned how to change a tire. I mean, there was just a different mindset from her parents' way of thinking to the way things are today. So I don't know what each generation would categorize the group adults to be, but whatever that is, I can guarantee you it's older now than it was before.
It's funny, like see on these social media posts, they posted up casts of certain TV shows like Cheers. Remember that show Cheers? And they had the pictures of all the cast members, and they're like, you look at them and the captions like they were only like in their early 30s, but they all look like they were in their 40s or 50s. They
back
just
then.
Looked, yeah.
Back
and now everybody looks younger. I mean, certainly try to achieve that younger look anyway. But it's funny that even from visually, optically, there's a difference there when you look at it's strange. It was just
it's a joke between my wife and I when we walk in. If we're seeing a doctor or something, we'll always walk out of the room and go, what was he, 12? Because they look so young.
Oh, I thought
that's a product of being older.
I thought you were going to say that your wife says, "Oh, that was that your father with you?"
I won't go there. Yes. Right. Okay. That's the risks you take when you marry young.
So if we bring it back to the chiropractic office and how the older generation or the generational differences between an employer and an employee and how to handle that, because, we talked a little bit about, understanding as an employer the generational differences, as the older adult taking the lead of understanding the differences in priorities in general, but also having those conversations with your employee about their priorities, right? I mean, what are your priorities for work, for career, for life, just in general? Nothing that ties them, or puts them in a corner, but understanding that employee better so that you can communicate and have them try to understand you better.
Totally agree. And be fair. You're going to have to adapt, and they might have to adapt, and you both meet in the middle a little bit where the employee has to give you more of what you want, but you have to give them more of what they want. And that's just the reality of things right now, that I can't go out there as a baby boomer unless I hire only baby boomers, which starts having its own issues because of the, certain things that become restricting as you get older, like getting up in the morning sometimes, But I'm just saying, you have to, it's a give and take. If you're going to have employees, and those employees are going to be, baby boomers, they're going to be X's, they're going to be Y's, they're going to be Z's, and so forth and so on, adapt.
That's probably one of the more challenging things, because you say to yourself as an employer, I'm offering you a job. You should adapt to me because I'm paying you.
And that might mean that maybe they have to adapt more than you have to adapt. But if you think you won't have to adapt at all, you're going to go through employees like water through a sieve.
Well, isn't that sort of one of the metrics? If you find it very difficult to find employees, maintain employees, maybe
the problem's not the employees.
Maybe look inward a little bit to say, even if you don't like it, but I might have to maybe alter my expectations in how I approach these employees, especially the generational.
Yeah, and that's probably a perfect way of saying it. Like if we were to say, what is the biggest walk away that you can have, is that when it comes to hiring people of different generations from you, manage your expectations.
And we talked about that when we talked about associates and chiropractic assistants almost. But in general, you got to lean into your employees these days. You have to make an investment in them so that they feel an investment in you, right? So it's, to me, it's like, well, if I hire an employee and just dispense all of the training and everything to another employee, well, first of all,
compounding error.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess some of that will depend on the generation of that employee who's, training the newbie, right? And so, but it all starts with leadership, right? So if you're not investing and showing that interest and showing that understanding of those differences in gaps in generation, why would an employee or a manager do it? They're just going to follow your lead, I think,
For the most part, it does. You lead from the top down. And here's a thought that it's kind of my final thought in this is, you have to recognize that in our chiropractic world today, different than in the past, there's more technology in our offices than ever before. And that technology requires a certain inbred level of skill, as well as acquired or learned skills. So the people that we're hiring are no longer that, we'll say, entry-level type of employee looking for their very first job or just a part-time job. We really need skilled, quality people to be able to meet the demands of the high-tech office that we now exist in. So as an employer, your mind has to recognize that I am looking for somebody maybe at a slightly higher level of understanding than I used to, because half of what goes on in my office has to be managed technologically. And sometimes the employer themselves doesn't even know the technology.
No, they actually don't. And then there's that, it's kind of like that niche education or that niche knowledge. You're hiring a younger person, embrace the things that they know. If they know social media, task them with parameters on how you're going to handle that social media for your office.
Yeah. I often ask people that are going through a lot of employees, I say, well, how much are you paying them? And they go, well, minimum wage in our area is this, and I pay them like $1 over that. I said, that doesn't work anymore. You need someone that knows so much more just to exist in this world today, let alone exist in a healthcare office, and let alone exist in a healthcare office that now has more tech in it than my Boma brain calculator that I had when I was a sophomore and undergrad. So I'm just saying it is a change all around. That's what we mean by you don't meet in the middle, but you do have to kind of meet somewhere.
Well, that plays into my belief that as an employer, and I do this myself, I try to create career opportunities, not jobs.
Right.
So if I'm looking for someone who I want to invest in, who wants to invest in me, who wants a career, not a job, if I'm treating it like that, then I'm going to attract that person just because my intent is now out there, and I'm going to invest in them and give them and just tell them right up front, this is a career that you can make for yourself. I will give you those opportunities. If you just want a job, I'm not sure this is the best fit, right? Filter them out right away.
Exactly. And I can leave you with this old Army advertisement. It's not just a job. It's an adventure.
Dun, dun, dun. I love it. All right. On that note, thank you again for joining us for another episode of All Things Chiropractic. I'm Paul Andrews.
Dr. Mark Davini.
Meine Freunde in Deutschland. Ich liebe dich.
Thanks for listening to All Things Chiropractic. We'd love to hear from you. Visit allthingschiropractic.com with comments, episode ideas, or questions. Or connect with us on Facebook and Instagram at All Things Chiropractic Podcast. Be sure to join Dr. Mark Davini and Paul Andrews next time for another episode of All Things Chiropractic.